Mr. President, I come here today, first of all, in celebration that the United States Senate is finally working again. In just 27 days, we have seen more amendments voted on the floor of the Senate than under the Democratic majority in the entire year 2014. We once again have a Senate where Republicans and Democrats can offer their amendments, can debate their amendments, and can vote them up or down. One of the resounding consequences of the election in November is the American people were tired of the Democratic do-nothing Senate. And we have a Senate that has shown up to work. Now, the bill we are voting on, the underlying bill, is an example of what the priorities should be in the United States Senate. The Keystone Pipeline bill ought to be a no-brainer. It ought to be an example of bipartisan cooperation. Indeed, one of the very first things I did 2 years ago, when I was newly elected to this body, was join with 10 senators, 5 Republicans, 5 Democrats, in sending a bipartisan letter to the President saying, approve the Keystone Pipeline now. Why? Number one, it will produce jobs. Tens of thousands of high-paying jobs. Number two, it will increase tax revenue. It will increase revenue for the federal government, for state and local governments. That revenue can be used to pay down our national debt, to provide for our vital needs. Number three, it will enhance our national security by allowing us to move towards North American energy independence rather than being dependent on foreign nations for oil, nations whose interests are very different and sometimes hostile to our own. And number four, building the Keystone Pipeline is unequivocally better for the environment. Indeed, I have joked, if you are a bearded, tattooed, Birkenstock-wearing, tree-hugging Greenpeace activist, you should love the Keystone Pipeline. Because if the pipeline is not built, it means we will continue to bring our oil in on overseas tankers and on rail, both of which are far more dangerous for the environment than a pipeline, both of which we know to a certainty, as long as there are tankers on the oceans, there will be spills. As long as there is rail, there will be spills. Moreover, if the pipeline is not built north-south, it's not like our friends, the Canadians, are simply going to leave the oil where it is. They are going to build the pipeline east-west instead of allowing it to be refined in America, where it produces high-paying jobs here up and down the Gulf Coast. The alternative is that it would be refined in Asia and China in far dirtier refineries that pollute the environment even more. So this ought to be a no-brainer. This ought to be an example where Republicans and Democrats come together in agreement. But sadly, it's not. And it's not because the modern Democratic Party has made a decision between two traditional favored children of the Democratic Party. The modern Democratic Party has made a decision that they care more about the campaign donations from California environmentalist billionaires than they do about the jobs for union members. Where, Mr. President, I would suggest that the 100 senators who are elected here, we ought to be fighting for hardworking men and women. We ought to be fighting for the union members, for all of the men and women who want a good, decent-paying jobs, who want to provide for their kids, who are tired of the stagnation of the Obama economy. Just last week, we heard the President give a State of the Union address where he talked about how swimmingly the economy is going. Well, you know, he was right. If you happen to be one of those California environmentalist billionaires, if you happen to be in the top 1%, the millionaires and billionaires who the President demagogues, then you have indeed gotten richer under President Obama. Today, the top 1% earn a higher share of our economy than any year since 1928. Those who walk the corridors of power in the Obama administration have gotten fat and happy. And yet working men and women, union members, their lives have gotten harder and harder and harder. We have today the lowest labor force participation since 1978. Median income in this country has stagnated for 2 decades. And yet, what is the Democratic Party doing? Marshaling every vote it can to vote against union members, to vote against hardworking men and women, to stand with the big dollars coming out of California. What a sad, sad statement of priorities. So let me commend Majority Leader Mitch McConnell for bringing up an open process, allowing Democrats amendments. I'd be happy to vote on Democratic amendments all day long and Republican amendments on the merits. And let me commend the majority as well for focusing on the issues that matter to the American people, namely bringing back jobs and economic growth and opportunity. Now, in the course of this open amendment proceeding, I've introduced 3 different amendments. One would get rid of the long-standing anachronistic ban on exporting crude oil that was put in place in the 70s and makes no sense in the current environment, is hurting jobs and economic growth. A second would obviate the need for having this fight every time a cross-border pipeline was built. It would streamline the process for building pipelines so we can move ahead with economic growth. Now, both of those amendments, I believe, are sound policy. I think they are supported by the interest of Americans across this country. And after long conversations with my friends and colleagues, Senator Murkowski and Senator Hoeven, we have agreed that we're going to have committee hearings in the coming months focusing on both of those issues, laying out the facts and the data to make clear that these are unambiguously good, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or libertarian, if you want jobs and economic growth. These reforms are sound reforms to bring back jobs and economic growth and opportunity. The third amendment I've introduced, which I'm hopeful we will vote on either today or tomorrow, is an amendment to expedite exports of liquid natural gas. And that, Mr. President, is what I'd like to speak about for just a few minutes. The amendment that I am presenting will expedite LNG exports to World Trade Organization members, removing unnecessary delays that have been caused by the arbitrary Department of Energy approval process. Currently, countries under free trade agreements with the United States enjoy a streamlined, expedited approval process to import our LNG. For projects to FTA countries, current law deems those, quote, in the public interest, and they get a permit, quote, without modification or delay. Yet those without such an agreement must instead submit to an arduous case-by-case, non-standardized process that ends up discouraging LNG trade and related investments, ends up killing jobs. For projects to non-FTA countries, right now there are no time limits and no standardized process by which the Department of Energy determines whether or not the project is, quote, in the public interest for receiving a permit. The amendment I've introduced would open the doors of trade to more than 160 countries in the World Trade Organization to receive this same expedited treatment that we currently have in place for free trade countries. This is particularly important, Mr. President, not just for economic development, not just for jobs, not just for growth, but also for the enormous geopolitical advantages that it will present to the United States. In the past several years, we have seen the consequences of the Obama-Clinton foreign policy. We have seen the U.S. receding from leadership in the world, and we have seen other nations, foreign nations, step into that void and use energy as a weapon, as a cudgel, whether it is Venezuela or Iran or Russia. Allowing expedited LNG exports strengthens our hands against those who would be enemies of America. And it strengthens the hands of our friends and allies. Here at home, according to a 2013 study, in the United States, LNG exports could create up to 450,000 new jobs by 2035. So we'll see, Mr. President, when Republicans and Democrats vote on this amendment, where each senator stands on whether or not we should allow the private sector to create up to 450,000 new jobs. Every Democrat that votes no can expect to go back to his or her state and face constituents, face the union members who would like to get some of those 450,000 new jobs, and explain why he or she voted against that hardworking man or woman having a job. Over the same time, GDP growth could generate anywhere from an additional $15.6 billion up to $73.6 billion. And by 2035, the net gain of manufacturing jobs could mean up to 76,000 new jobs. You know, a lot of members of this body like to talk about manufacturing, like to talk about the steel industry, the car industry. Used to be the backbone of the American middle class, was the blue-collar job that you could work with dignity, you could provide for your family, provide for your kids. Every senator that votes no to LNG exports because they want to continue receiving the campaign money from the California billionaires had better be prepared to return home to their states and look in the eyes of the manufacturing workers and explain why he or she voted against 76,000 new manufacturing jobs. And geopolitically, let's take Ukraine. You know, all of us sat not long ago in the House of Representatives for a joint session when the president of Ukraine addressed us both, and we stood over and over and over again, standing quite literally alongside Ukraine. If we want action to match those words, then every senator here should vote yes on this amendment. Ukraine right now relies on natural gas for 40% of its energy needs. More than 60% of the natural gas that Ukraine gets and depends on comes from Russia. And Russia uses that natural gas as a club to extract economic blackmail on Ukraine. Last spring, I traveled to Ukraine, to Poland, to Estonia. As I visited with our leaders throughout Europe, friends of ours, they have said over and over again, help us free ourselves from energy blackmail from Russia. As of today, the Department of Energy has approved 9 export permits to non-free trade agreement countries within the last 2 years. 28 applications are currently pending, stacked up on the desk, going nowhere. The increased energy production from allowing us to export the resources we have to friends and allies who want and need it would spur investment and create thousands of jobs for Americans. It would be a boon to countries like Ukraine. It would be a boon to Europe. It would be a boon to the Baltics, who are watching what's happening in Ukraine and wondering, are we next? It would be a boon to friends of ours like Germany, who likewise depend on Russia for significant energy needs. Today, this body faces a pivotal question. Will we lead the world into a new generation of American prosperity and energy prosperity led by the American energy renaissance we're experiencing? Or will we instead shut off our borders, erect walls, and allow our friends and allies to be dependent on tyrants like Putin or Maduro? We need to come together in a bipartisan manner to say we support jobs, we support economic growth, and we support standing united alongside our friends and allies in defense of freedom. Mr. President, I would urge my colleagues, both Republicans and Democrats, to support this amendment. I yield the floor.